Hi, my name is Gibson, and I'm the co-owner and creator of the Personal Development School. This is your daily breakthrough video, and in this video, I'm going to actually go through a series of different questions that have been asked inside the Personal Development School that I thought some of them were just worth sharing with the YouTube community. And so I'm going to go through a few because these are ones that get asked quite consistently, and questions that I wanted to sort of make space to do verbal communication. So we have a forum inside the school, and members, when they attend live to the webinars, there's 2 live webinars a week, and they come in and they ask all their questions in the webinars. And then there's also a place for people to post their questions ahead of time if they can't attend the live webinars. And so from there, I'm gathering sort of the data of what I see show up most, questions that I just think deserve some attention because they get asked significantly and the impact of them is quite significant. So I'm going to go through for probably about 20 minutes or so and just answer a bunch of really significant questions that have been asked. So one of the first ones, and I made a separate full video on this, but I'm just going to dive into sort of a more high level answer on this today. So one of the first questions is from one of our members who I will call A. And A asks about if you could do a video around gaslighting, and mentioned that she'd heard it been brought up in a couple of different webinars, and basically wanted to understand how we know if somebody's doing it or how to know if we are accidentally doing it and not realizing. So what is gaslighting? So you can think of gaslighting as basically being some form of manipulation, specifically through psychological means, that sort of puts somebody in a position where they're questioning their own state of mind, like sort of questioning their own sanity. So this can be a whole bunch of different things. One of the most common things I see is like if, let's say you and your partner are out and you're getting dinner, and the next day there's some kind of situation that happens at the dinner table the night before, and the next day your partner and yourself are having a conversation about like, oh, do you remember that thing at the dinner table? And maybe your partner says to you, that never happened. Or maybe you have something that happened that you still are holding on to from a year ago, and you finally work up the courage to bring it into a conversation, and your partner says, oh, you always remember things wrong that never existed. And maybe for you, because it was a painful event, it was a very clear memory. And so this is the most common example I see. Now, gaslighting usually occurs in narcissistic relationships, but that's not always the case. Individuals who are not narcissists can also gaslight, okay? And what sort of differentiates somebody who's narcissistic from somebody who's not is that the gaslighting in a narcissistic relationship tends to be one of the core founding features of the relationship. It happens consistently, it happens all the time, and there's generally this pervasive feeling of the partner of the narcissist constantly questioning their own reality, feeling like they can't hold on to their own individual thinking and opinions and beliefs, and feeling like their brain and their sanity is almost like infiltrated in a way. So there tends to be a really pervasive feeling. Now, that's not to say that you should accept any gaslighting and make it okay. It's absolutely not okay. Sometimes, however, we can get gaslighting mixed up because sometimes somebody really truly doesn't remember an event. But the idea, a healthy response, if let's say we go back to that example where one partner says, I've finally got the courage and worked out the courage to have a conversation about something they're holding on to from a year ago, and the other partner says that never happened. A healthier response to that, if it's not some kind of intentional gaslighting, would be something like, I don't think that happened. I don't remember that happening, but tell me about your feelings. Like, what did you feel that you need to talk about? And like, what do you need to resolve it? And open the conversation instead of just shut the door immediately without inquiring, right? So that's sort of one way of telling the difference between something that's purposeful and intentional versus something that's not. Now, other examples, I'm going to go through some examples, and I'm also going to go through sort of the root cause of why an individual would gaslight, okay? Another example could be somebody sort of denying something that they told you once, right? It can be some form of denial or some kind of just like outright lie when you know that this isn't the case. It can also be somebody who, a form of gaslighting could be if somebody acts one way all the time behind closed doors and acts a totally different way in public with other people. And sometimes that can leave an individual going, oh my gosh, like, is this me? Like, and you sort of get into that space where you're questioning your own sanity. Now, another couple sort of tactics related to gaslighting can be things like projecting things onto you all the time, turning situations around instead of ever taking accountability, so you're always left feeling like things are your fault, or intentionally confusing you and creating misleading information, and basically putting like deception techniques into a conversation or a situation to create this sort of sense of cognitive dissonance where there's just a lot of confusion and obviously has an impact on self-esteem. So what's the root cause of somebody who gaslights? Usually the root cause is that the person who's doing the gaslighting is experiencing such low self-esteem as well, and they don't want to take ownership for things that they might have done because they are terrified and petrified of being wrong. Does it make it okay? No. But does it make it as evil and terrible, like this person's trying to intentionally cause manipulation and mess me up? Usually it's not really rooted in that. Sometimes with more severe narcissistic experiences, it can be sort of a way of being able to sort of break somebody's mind down in order to monopolize their mind a little bit more. Like if you're the one person who is sort of in charge of another person's mind because you've broken the person down and through repetition programmed so many things, and maybe a dependency into there and a questioning and a low self-esteem, so somebody's afraid of leaving. Sometimes a narcissist does things like this, and it's so tough. But usually even that, and again, I'm not justifying this or saying this is okay, but often even that is just an individual who themselves is petrified of being left and themselves is petrified of being vulnerable. And so if I'm terrified of being left, let's pretend I'm Bob, the narcissist. And if I'm terrified of being left, terrified of being abandoned, terrified of being wrong and bad and having to own my mistakes and being shamed because I have this brokenness inside of me, well, I'm going to try to put you in the same space that I'm in so I can prevent you from leaving, right? So that's usually the root cause. Sometimes that's on a spectrum. Sometimes that becomes really extreme, and sometimes people gaslight and do things in a very premeditated and calculated way, and there can be really scary and unhealthy people to be around. However, I do want to say that the vast majority of the time, gaslighting is somebody's core wound showing up, somebody showing up very poorly in a situation, and it's out of their own trauma, and they may not be a narcissist at all. Now, what do you do if you're being gaslit? I'm sort of going on I said I'd answer a few questions, but I'm sort of diving hard into this topic here. What do? You don't stand for it. You set a hard boundary. It is a form of manipulation. If you know you're being gaslighted, you are being manipulated. You want to be clear about what you see. You want to be clear about, this is my reality. You cannot take that away from me. This is my experience. And if you don't want to be a part of that, then that's fine. If you don't want to validate it and hold space for it, then that's fine. But I have a boundary that says you trying to stop me from having my experiences and you trying to override what was true for me is not appropriate, and it's not acceptable in this relationship. So when you're open to having a conversation that's healthier, even if we can't agree on the situation, if you can hear out my feelings about the situation, because the situation circumstances are never what we're trying to resolve. It's the feelings around the situation circumstances and the needs that we have to get from the situation circumstances to come to resolution. When you're open to hearing these things, I'm open to having a healthier conversation. And if you do that once and it works, and then the person gaslights a year later, and you're like, oh my gosh, and you talk about it again, then sometimes people are going to fall out of line and do not so great stuff. And hopefully both people are working on themselves in a way that that's never even has to be a thing. However, if you're seeing this in any form of consistency, and when you communicate it doesn't do anything, you should get out of that relationship fast. Okay, so I hope that all makes sense. And that was a great question. And so I'm going to read another question in here that I thought was important. So, and sorry if you can hear my dog barking in the background. It's probably really quiet, but just in case, I apologize in advance. So, another question. We are going to call this person M. And M says, hi, Thais. I've been with somebody who's dismissive avoidant for a certain period of time, living together with a certain period of time. Over the past little while, this person avoids conversation about things that are not superficial. But if this person does respond, there's a lot of criticism and all kinds of things that this person doesn't know if they can live with. How do I respond to the criticism because it's causing me pain? How do I know if this person's hoping that I will leave and that's why they're criticizing and doing all that? The person says, they don't want me to go, but they won't stop me if I do. They withdraw, but if I start distancing, then they say that I'm running away. And so I feel like I can't win. Okay, so this is a really tough situation. This person says, we've had some really great times as well and want to go back there, but it's been a little bit challenging. And so I'm sort of prefacing some of the wording just to protect any potential person's privacy. And this is shared in a public forum, but still just to be extra cautious. So long story short, basically the theme here is that this individual feels confused. M feels confused. Feels like they're being pushed away, and is like, does this person that I'm with want me to leave because I'm being criticized? And then when I ask, do you want me to go? They say, well, I don't want you to, but I won't stop you if you do. Now, this person's a dismissive avoidant, okay, that M is with. So here, and this is put in there. So here's what happens often with dismissive avoidance. Dismissive avoidance will often become critical when they have their own unmet needs. And when they have their own unmet needs, they start to feel painful and they can sometimes become critical as well. We see it less than with other attachment styles. However, it is something that does take place. And so when that person's at the point of criticism, anybody who's at a point of criticism has an unmet need, feels deeply unheard, and instead of feeling safe enough, not because of necessarily you if you're dating this person, but because of whatever internal programming they have, belief patterns and such that exist within themselves. If these things are happening in the background, okay, then what takes place is, let's pretend I'm a dismissive avoidant and I have this deeply unmet need. I don't believe that I can communicate it because I think my needs will be rejected or they'll never be met because those were maybe my experiences as the dismissive avoidant in childhood. Well, then what takes place is I feel like I can't communicate to you directly, and then it comes out in passive aggression or criticism. And so when that then happens, that doesn't necessarily mean I want somebody to leave the relationship. That doesn't necessarily mean that I want my partner to get out of here. Often dismissive avoidance, if they want somebody to leave, they'll say things like, yeah, you know what, it's not working. If you bring it up, if you initiate the conversation, if you're hoping the person leaves as a dismissive avoidant and they bring it up, you're going to be like, well, I feel like it's not working. Dismissive avoidants are pretty good. They will avoid conflict, but once they're in the situation, they're going to be really blunt and sometimes overly honest and direct with what they're feeling in the situation. Okay. So I see, number one, that this individual doesn't want you to leave from what I see here, but is also not feeling safe being vulnerable enough to say, no, please stay. They also have maybe some pride, or they have some things that are preventing them from being vulnerable to express that, no, they don't want you to leave. And then this is reinforced by the next space that says, when I withdraw, this person says you're running away. Like the dismissive avoidant says, I feel like you're running away. So M says, I feel like I can't win. So here's what I see in this case. That's reinforcing. If the dismissive avoidant is like, oh, I feel like you're running away, then the dismissive avoidant is going to want, they would never say that unless they would say, oh, it's not working, or they would have a conversation. But if they're telling you, oh, I feel like you're running away, and they're sensitive about it, that's their indirect way of saying, I feel like there's a distance. So what I see as the core problem in this situation is actually that the DA here is having a hard time articulating what they truly need and communicating that vulnerably. And that's probably because of their own internal programming. So, because it sounds like you're trying really hard here. So what that means is it's time to be able to ask, okay, well, what do you really need? What does it look like? Is there anything that's missing in the relationship right now for you? And I give you free space to have that conversation with me so we can resolve it. I sometimes find that criticism is actually based in fear and this lack of feeling safe to communicate and be vulnerable. And I would love to work through that so I can better understand you and we can work these things out together. And I also think that for M, it's important to express your own needs as well and express some of what you are feeling in the situation. Okay. And again, that blame and all those things are usually coming from a deeper space. So, last one I'm going to go through. There's a couple more in here, and I'm just gonna let's see. I'm AA/FA. I want to become more secure and have taken the AA self-esteem and anxiety course, and I'm currently working on the Mastering Your Emotions course. I am becoming, oh, this is a long question. I am becoming, sorry, I lost where I was for 1 second. I have been doing a ton of work on becoming more aware of my own needs and trying to meet them with myself, including, awesome. She's put a whole bunch of things in here, and then says, I've noticed a huge improvement with capital letters. Thank you for sharing that. But I'm feeling like these needs are quite being met. I think she's trying to say not quite being met, because I'm still looking externally to coworkers to validate if I made the right decisions. I'm still flirting and getting people to ask me on dates, even though I don't see relationship potential. I'm giving myself affection in different ways, good. But it doesn't feel nearly as good as being held in somebody's arms. Good. So all the great work I'm doing is helpful, but it doesn't feel like it's enough to meet my own needs and feel satisfied. So do you have any other practical suggestions or strategies I can use for trying to meet my own needs for validation, connection, and self-love? So this is, I'm very excited to answer. So great question. Here's something really interesting. So here's what I always see as a pattern. If I'm doing the work and I am meeting my own needs for these things, for love, connection, and validation, and I'm doing these things, and she wrote these lists of things that she's doing regularly, okay, which is excellent. And she's saying it's really helping, but there's still this this void feeling. Here's what this will tell you. This means that, and I can see from her exercises, things she's doing. She's watching videos on YouTube, introducing a journal, answering questions about herself, doing meditations almost every morning, treating herself well, making time for self-care. Had this amazing single Valentine's Day with a fancy dinner and massage and flowers for myself, doing all the coursework suggestions. So she's doing a really great job. So whenever I see somebody and they're doing an excellent job with how they're showing up in terms of their thoughts and belief patterns and even actions, and then they still feel like this cup isn't fully full in terms of validation, connection, self-love, or whatever it might be, you can fill in your blank. It means that in a space that you're not consciously aware of, you are still doing more on one side than the other, okay? So I'll give you an example to make that make sense. Let's say that I'm this wonderful individual that we'll call Kay, and I am doing all these things, and I'm really working on validating myself, connecting, and loving myself. And so I have these great habits, but I still feel like there's this lack. Well, what this is telling me is that there's somewhere in my life I'm still invalidating myself more than validating myself, disconnecting from myself more than connecting to myself, and not fully showing up to love myself more than loving myself. So I have to take inventory, because we can do these things where we take these amazing actions to start, and then we can do these indirect things to ourselves. So I'll give you an example. Let's say that I am validating myself through these actions, these wonderful actions, like these affirmations, but then maybe I go all day long, and in my internal dialogue, I still beat myself up a lot. You know, if I make a mistake at work, I call myself stupid. If I have a conversation with somebody and it doesn't go well, I'm like, oh God, it's my fault. And I blame myself for it and I ruminate. You know, if I do these things and I'm beating myself up over here, then even if I do all these wonderful actions, they will cancel each other out. And if I'm doing more negative than positive, I'm still going to feel at a deficit. So what you want to do if you're in this situation, any of you in any form, is if you're doing these amazing actions and you still feel this void somewhere, you have to zoom way in and take hyper inventory of where you still do the opposite of what needs you're trying to get met in your life, and allow yourself to see that. Now, you shared as well, like you still miss, like I think you said something like being in somebody's arms and getting kisses and things like that. Those are desires, those are needs, and unmet needs will always cause a little bit of pain. And that pain is good in a way, because that pain is there to help us move in a different direction, right? But there's a difference between pain and suffering. Pain is a lack of needs being met. Suffering is the story we make around the needs not being met. So maybe I have a lack of affection and then I make it mean I'm unlovable, right? And that can be really painful. So it's okay to have a little bit of pain. That should never really be more in this situation than like, a 1 to 5 out of 10 we say is the pain. But I think because you're doing so much work around getting the needs met, maybe it's like a 2 or a 3 because you're meeting the needs through yourself first. So if you're experiencing like a 2 or 3 out of 10, that's normal. You're not going to fill the cup completely when part of it is connection to another human being. But that's always manageable, and that should feel like a little bit of a burning desire instead of a pain point. And if it's beyond that and it really feels like a pain point, take hyper inventory in each of the 7 areas of life and ask yourself, where am I still invalidating myself, disconnecting from myself? And that can be like disconnecting from my own feelings and needs, maybe putting everybody before me or ignoring my own boundaries or not checking in throughout the day or whatever it might be. You can look in the 7 areas of life: career, mental, emotional, spiritual, physical, financial, and relationships. And where am I not loving myself completely? Okay, so great question. I hope that helps. I have one last question I just really want to answer in here. So it's from, we're going to say C inside of the school. And this individual says, and I think I answered part of this in the webinar because they ended up being here live. But so there's 3 questions. I'm just going to choose which one because I know I answered one for sure. Okay, and the other 2. Okay, so number 1, C and their partner are both trying to overcome codependency. Can you give a few examples of codependency versus healthy interdependency? So codependency would be things like making each other responsible for your feelings and needs. It would be like not having any time apart and wanting to do everything together for and with each other. It would be like placing expectations on people to fulfill your needs without communicating them effectively. It would be experiencing forms of separation anxiety because you're terrified of losing the person. As a result of that fear or terror, you end up denying or disowning yourself. It would mean losing yourself in the relationship. It would mean saying yes when you really want to say no. It would mean being in an imbalance between, this one area of your life, relationships, and then all of the 6 other areas of your life. Slacking in your career or finances or mental emotional work or spiritual growth or physical health, and just sort of like throwing those things aside because you're so hyper focused on a relationship. Healthy interdependency you can think of as being sort of the opposite. And in the school I have a worksheet for codependency, how to identify, and it's in the workbook. It talks about it's like a checklist to see am I codependent or not, and each of those things, I think there's like 20 something on there. Each of those things are a point to work on. So go in there too and check. And if people want to be emailed this or something like that, you can reach out to info@personaldevelopmentschool.com and maybe we'll put this on the website or something. But we have a checklist that says this is codependency, this is not codependency, and you can check those behaviors that you're showing up as codependent. And the last thing I would say about those behaviors is if I'm healthily interdependent, there's a balance between having myself and my own feelings and needs and autonomy and having somebody else at the same time. And it's really the integration of myself and my truth in a relationship. So it means I can speak my mind, I can share my feelings, I can express a boundary, I can talk about my needs, I can share if I ever feel offended or funny, and I'm not repressing these things in order to try to gain favor or approval with my partner or in order to avoid conflict or something like that. I feel like I can openly express and be myself. And I'll also see that there's a balance between all 7 areas of my life because I'm not over prioritizing the relationship to the point where it's almost like an addiction and other things have to fall away because this is such a focal point. So healthy interdependency, you'll feel like you have yourself and you have a partner too, and you still have your social life, you still have career growth or financial growth or whatever other areas of life you want to focus on, your mental, emotional, spiritual growth. So those are good markers of healthy interdependency. There are 20 big things I could go through, but that's sort of the general umbrella version. So if you want access to that, let me know. You can email info@personaldevelopmentschool.com. And I hope this was a helpful video for you guys who are curious about learning more and touching on these core topics. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.